Good morning. If I can call the meeting to order, please. The first order of business is public speaking. And Sophia, do we have public speakers?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we have 6 speakers. The first speaker will be Benita Johnson from TWU, Local 100, followed by Judy Wolf, then Matt Shotkin.
Good morning, all. My name is Benita Johnson. I am the Recording Secretary of Transport Workers Union Local 100. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, during the past several weeks we have seen the public's outrage over the TA's handling of the December blizzard. For tens of thousands of us who see this up close on a daily basis, how Transit Works management's failure did not seem like a fluke. It seemed like the result of a culture that puts riders second and workers third. Transit workers take pride in our work, and that is what made this episode so painful to us. The path taken by management meant that we were not there for our riders. Understandably, every rider likes to complain about transit, but very few of us can make do without it. They need us, and we need them to be we need to be there for them. Going forward, we need to make sure that we are there. This means not swallowing real cuts in service traveling under the technocratic slogan of aligning service with demand. It means saying no to political policies that starve vital services in the name of fiscal responsibility. And it means not letting transit become unaffordable for those who need it the most. This board is morally obligated to all of us. Of you, we expect none of it. But the riding public is not happy with being nickeled and dimed. And we transit workers who do the very best we can every single solitary day, we simply cannot and will not accept it. Together, we may just put a halt to it. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker, Judy Wolf.
Good morning, Chairman Walter and members of the MTA Board. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Judy Wolf, and I represent the Track Worker Family Fund of Rochester, New York. I'm glad to have the chance to follow up with you, having presented information to you regarding railway track worker safety at the September 29, 2010 MTA Board meeting. I have brought duplicate information from that meeting for anyone who would like a copy. The newspapers of the last several months have been filled with bad news for all of us, downstate and upstate. I have provided a few such articles today. A Brooklyn transit worker was electrocuted on the third rail in October. It was later discovered that the portable third rail alarms were not present. When they are used, it has been found that they do not meet the proper voltages. Today I'd like to throw out the old script I have been using and reapproach you in a new spirit of optimism and cooperation. Let's get with the program. It is a new year with new state leadership. Both upstate and downstate have representation in our top state government. There is a new feeling of working together and surging ahead to restore our state to its former highly regarded status. I believe you and I can play a role in that. By working together, we can achieve so much in limiting wayside worker deaths and critical injuries, exorbitant lawsuit settlements that stress the state budget and anger taxpayers, and bad media publicity. Given the recent number of track worker deaths and fatalities, it makes no sense that workers are not given the proper tools to do their jobs. If the Long Island Railroad, Metro North, and other agencies are using the proper safety equipment such as arc-proof clothing and voltage devices, why not the New York City Transit? Life is precious. We must never forget that. Let us demonstrate to every track worker his or her safety is of utmost importance. Thank you.
Next speaker, Matt Shotkin, followed by Chris Tobin.
Good morning. Andrew, your tie is very nice and striped. Mr. Chairman, your tie is very nice too. I'm glad that Chairman Jay Walder is staying on as the head of the MTA. He does a very good job with the operation of the organization. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you. Chris Tobin, followed by Murray Bowden and William Henderson.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the board, and thank you for having us here. Jay, congratulations on your reappointment. As an employee of MTA New York City Transit, I've seen some positive changes with Jay, and as the union member, we look forward to working together with him so that problems like what happened in December don't happen again. It takes us both working together, and we look forward to reaching out to you, Jay, in the field. Thank you.
Thank you. Murray Bowden.
I was here on Monday, and I'm here at great reluctance. But I spoke before the Bridges and Tunnel meeting, and what was presented by the President was absolutely incorrect, wrong, misleading, and everything else about the Henry Hudson toll gates, and I had to come back this morning and correct it. If you're going to take the toll barriers out, then you remove the physical thing in the middle, and he said, hey, they're going through at 15 miles an hour. It should be at 40 miles an hour. You're feeding that area with 2 lanes coming down on a parkway. You then have 3 lanes exiting. One board member here came on Monday. He said there was a backup at the Easy Pass lanes. Not only do you remove the arm, you remove the whole mechanism. There needs to be only 2 Easy Pass lanes, and the signs need not be and should not be over the actual barrier, but moved 20, 30 yards up, because you do not want people making last-minute changes. You want to move the changes up where it's safe. And if you want to separate the toll lanes from the other, you do it with dotted lines. Mr. President, if you would pick up your cell phone, tell maintenance to go up on the bridge. There are 6 orange barrels at the beginning of the 3rd lane for the cash lane. They've been there for 3 months. For no reason, and keep people from getting into the 3rd lane at the proper time. So get on your phone, have those barrels removed, because they do nothing. Now, at the Port Authority meeting last month, Board Member Silverman said, how could you miss a $3 billion cost overrun? Because nobody was watching. Nobody said that you take out the physical barriers. You have only 2 lanes. The Thruway has it. The New Jersey Turnpike has it. The Garden State has it. Everybody has highway speed lanes. I don't call them express lanes. I call them highway speed lanes. At this point, it says 40 miles an hour at the top. You actually painted dotted lines on for the Cape Arc exit, and it cut out the wrong lane miles by 99%. Give the customer information that is useful. Warn him what he has to do. And by the way, I have the agenda on my reader here, so we saved the paper.
Thank you. Final speaker, William Henderson, PCAC.
Good morning. We're anxious to hear the presentation on the winter weather responses this morning, and I won't really speak to any of the substantive parts of that since you will be discussing that later. What I do want to speak about is communication and the need for better communication during these storms. There's obviously a need for an intensive effort with internally and with other public safety and other governmental agencies. But what I want to talk about is communication with the riders. The riders are generally pretty resilient. If you tell them what's going to happen, they'll be able to adapt to it. But they need to be told what is going to happen. They need to be told through a number of channels. Not all riders receive information in the same way or even in the same languages. It's crucial that the website provide accurate and actionable information for the riders, and that the web-based alert systems and social media initiatives do the same. That wasn't necessarily the case in the blizzard, and we need to have that information at hand. Broadcast media needs to be used extensively. Obviously, we'd like to see the displays in stations and even the advertising boards at the entrances to stations display information for riders so they know what's going on and they know what their options are. It's also critical for the riders to know what to expect in advance. Information on implications of winter storms for bus, subway, and commuter rail riders should be readily accessible to riders in advance of the storms. We had too much confusion about terms such as limited service. People didn't know what limited service meant. We think that the LIRR's snow emergency schedule that they're preparing now is a positive step, and we'd like to see more things along this line done. We look forward to an open dialogue about how to best inform customers in winter storms, and we're happy to work with you in any way we can and assist in any way we can to provide better information to the customers. Thank you.
Thank you. This concludes the public speaking session.
And thank you very much. Thank you for our public speakers. Can I ask for a vote, please, to approve the minutes of the December board meeting? In favor? Opposed? Thank you. Before I turn to the business of our agenda today, I'd like to take a moment and offer a few words in regard to Bill Morange, the Director of Security for the MTA, who will be retiring at the end of this month. Bill has been with the MTA for about 7 years. But it will be a real misstatement to speak about 7 years, because this is 7 years as the capstone of a 46-year career in law enforcement. It is the nature of the world that we live in today, unfortunately, that the issues of security have risen to the top of the list. They get so much of our attention in the world that's here, and the question of security in our system is not just a question of policing. It's a question of policing and coordination with various people across the entire region. Every police force, every terrorism task force, every element of that. As I look at what Bill's done for this organization, I have to tell you that his ability to be able to engage and connect with all of these forces, with the multiplicity of people that we need to be able to do it, to ensure that our transit system, which is so center to this region, is actually center in that effort of thinking about that, I think is one of the great legacies that he is going to leave behind in our company. He has worked hand in hand in regard to the counterterrorism task forces, and he has worked hand in hand, and I might add very, very successfully, with the NYPD. We saw this earlier this year. We set out in a wholly new initiative to be able to say, could we work together with NYPD to take the cameras in our 3 busiest subway stations, Times Square, Grand Central, and Penn Station, and bring them directly into the NYPD's command center and have live images going into the NYPD's command center. When we set out to do that, many people looked at this and said, gee, you'll never be able to figure out how to do that. You'll never be able to get the coordination between our organization to be able to make that happen. Bill had a different view. He had a view that said we can do it, and I'm happy to say, as we said a few months ago, we no longer have to say we can do it. We can say we did do it. And I think that will be a second lasting legacy here. I think I'm expressing the view of the board, I hope, and I'll give people an opportunity to speak, to thank Bill for his long career in service, and particularly his career at the MTA, protecting the people of the city, protecting our riders, protecting the people of the state, and indeed people of the state of Connecticut who are using our system. We are in your debt. I'm losing a friend here, which is very tough for me. And the guy who would always knock on my door and walk in my office and say something with a smile, with a sense, and to give me the confidence that we knew how to be able to do things, who tell it like it is, and make it happen. My friend, we'll miss you here, and we wish you the best. There may be other comments that board members want to make. Susan?
Since I came to the board, I've been on the Safety and Security Committee, so I've heard, I can't even count the number of presentations that Bill has made over the years. He was always forthcoming. He always told it straight as it was. But like Jay, the most impressive thing to me was the fact that his middle name is collaboration. He reached out to other agencies, nationally and internationally. He raised their level of respect for MTA and its own security, and we learned from them. And the debt that we owe him is, in my mind, inestimable. It's a wonderful thing. We are all going to miss him. He's a friend to all of us. Everyone on the board, I think, has seen examples of his kindness and thoughtfulness. Plus, he's a very, very good cop. Thank you.
Can I see? I worked closely with Bill on the Capital Construction Committee, and I don't know, I obviously was late, but I don't know if Jay used this word to describe Bill, but steady is a word that I would definitely use, because the unfortunate events nearly 10 years ago led to the fact that security is one of the most important departments in any agency, corporation, or a government. And so Bill's importance, if that's the word, became elevated 10 years ago. And he's still, I don't want to say he's unemotional in a cold way, but he's unemotional in the proper sense, that he looks at all the issues and isn't biased. It's a very unique character trait, and he's also quite charming. So we'll miss you.
Well, my experience with Bill has always been around here. He was always here, worked with various committees in various ways. But I had a personal experience when we decided that we were going to establish a canine facility, and this happened at the same time that the payroll mobility tax was forefront in everyone's mind. So in our county, canine facility, MTA. Well, we met and we had a meeting, and Bill attended the meeting with some of our local people, and we walked out of there, and the next day I got a call from the supervisor. He says, "This canine facility, I think this is going to be great." Well, Bill had turned them around. The first thing he said was, "I'm a cop, and that's why I'm here." And that changed their mind, and now we've had subsequent meetings, and all is well, and I don't think that would have happened if it wasn't for Bill. Thanks.
Andrew?
I've always been really interested in the security of our system, and I've always been able to speak to Bill, and Bill has always been really forthcoming, telling me what's in the works, what's happening, what's been hooked up, what hasn't been hooked up. Just a terrific guy, a really responsive guy. We had an incident in the Times Square subway station once where one of the PCAC staff members was a little roughed up by a police officer. Bill got right to the problem, got the camera records and everything. So, Bill, you're really going to be missed. I didn't know your middle name was Collaboration. That's news to me. But enjoy your retirement, my friend, and what you've started here, I hope, will be continued and will keep us all safe. Thanks so much.
Being on the board and having responsibility over an entity that has so many moving parts, 65,000 employees, moving millions of people a day, we're really very dependent upon having the trust and confidence in the people who are the heads of our respective divisions. And I will say that in my time here, I learned that Bill was the consummate professional and gave me great confidence that we placed the security of our riders, of our employees, and many times ourselves in his capable hands. And I think that this agency is much the better for his service. He is as I say, a consummate professional. He has great dignity, and his presence will be a great loss to all of us. Thank you, Jay. Yeah.
Over a very, very treacherous decade, over 2 million people have used the subways every day in complete safety, and that's a tremendous debt that the public owes you. You've been a wonderful and very comforting presence to all of us, and we are going to miss you. Thank you for what you've done.
During the 7 years that Bill has been here, we have not had any major security incidents in our transportation system, unlike many other places in the world. Are you lucky, or is it all because you're the best security person in the world? It may, who knows whether you're just a lucky guy, but we were lucky to have you.
Thank you. I'm sure our words, Bill, understate our true appreciation to you. They're the best that we can offer right now. I would also want to do one more thing, which is to introduce to you our new Director of Security, Doug Ziegler. Doug? It would be unfair to describe anyone as, in quotes, filling Bill's shoes. And so I won't describe Doug in any way that way. He is a 37-year veteran of the New York City Police Department. I believe that he is distinctly qualified to lead our multifaceted security program. He has been in a number of senior roles at NYPD, the chief of the Community Affairs Bureau, the chief of the Organized Crime Control Bureau, the chief of the Housing Bureau, and he's been a borough commander in Queens. He has a law degree from New York Law School, master's and bachelor's degrees from John Jay College of Criminal Justice. I will tell you that as we began the effort with a heavy heart to search for somebody to take over our security function, and we began meeting with people, Doug stood out in a way that I think was truly impressive. I think he brings many of the same qualities of collaboration that so many of you have spoken to today. He brings an on-the-ground knowledge of what it takes to make policing work, and he is well aware of the challenges that we have in our environment day in and day out, because we can never, not for one day, not for one moment, become complacent about the security challenges that are in front of us in our transit system. Doug, it's great to have you on board. Welcome, and we're lucky to have you, and I'm happy to say that Doug and Bill have been able to spend the last few weeks in a transition process, which I think, again, hopefully will serve the organization very, very well. I think Doug will be hitting the ground running Monday morning. I'd say Monday morning at 9, but I've already come to realize 9. He's went way before that, so he'll be hitting the ground Monday morning. I will turn to the regular orders of business if I can. Andrew, if we can turn to the report on the Committee of Finance. Thank you.
There is one action item. The action item is the approval of the LIPA Traction Power Agreement and the LIPA Right-of-Way Occupancy Agreement. The committee recommends this action, and I move it.
Second. In favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
There is one non-competitive procurement in the amount of $42,750, and I move this procurement.
Second. In favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
There are 5 competitive procurements in the amount of $6.45 million. I move these procurements.
In favor? Opposed? Thank you.
There are no ratifications today. There are 3 real estate action items this month, which are described in the board materials, and I move these action items.
In favor? Opposed? Thank you very much.
That concludes the finance report.
Thank you. Doreen, if we can turn to the Transit Committee, please.
Good morning. The Transit Committee offers 5 procurements totaling $30.7 million. 4 are non-competitive in the amount of $29.2 million. The committee recommends them, and I move them.
In favor? Opposed?
There are no competitive procurements this month, but there's one ratification in the amount of $1.5 million. Again, the committee recommends it, and I move it.
In favor? Opposed?
That does it for transit. Thank you.
Okay. I did want to put one footnote on one transit item that's here, which we very appropriately approved a moment ago, which is for our fare collection system. You are now seeing substantial costs that we are incurring to keep that fare collection system in good repair right now. I think in a system that depends so much on what we're able to do at the fare box and our ability to be able to collect revenues, I think this procurement underscores a point that we've known as a board, but that I think we have to give real heed to, which is the absolute need to be able to replace our fare collection system. We are keeping it tottering on its last ends right now. Everything transit is doing to keep it going is absolutely right. There's no question about that. But we must move forward to replace this technology and move to a modern fare collection system that will have dependability and reliability and allow us to operate in a really efficient manner. So it just underscored it for me. I just wanted to make that point to others. We turn to the bus side of the house. Nancy, please.
Yes. There was one non-competitive procurement for the amount of $50,000. The committee recommended at the meeting, and I move it.
Second. In favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
No competitive procurements nor ratifications. That concludes it.
Thank you very much. We turn to the Rail Committee, and I think I'm told Mitch, it's your turn, right?
Yep. Thank you, sir. Combined on-time performance for the 2 railroads during the month of December was 94.65%, and we congratulate both railroads in the view of the committee, especially in relation to the storms which occurred. There are 2 non-competitive procurements, one for the Long Island Railroad and one for Metro North, in the total amount of $1.8 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
In favor? Opposed?
There are 6 competitive procurements, one for the Long Island Railroad, 4 for Metro North, and 1 for MTA Capital Construction Company in the total amount of $15.4 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
In favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
And there is 1 ratification this month for the Long Island Railroad in the amount of $871,810. The committee recommends this ratification, and I move it.
In favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
That concludes the report.
Thank you very much, and we turn to Bridges and Tunnels. Mark?
Bridges and Tunnels has no non-competitive procurements. There are 3 competitive procurements in the amount of $2.9 million. The committee recommends them, and I move them.
Second. In favor? Aye. Opposed?
And there is 1 ratification in the amount of $152,565. The committee recommends this ratification, and I move it.
Second. In favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
And this concludes Bridges and Tunnels.
Terrific. Am I missing something? No items, so we move to the winter weather. Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, that concludes the items that are in the agenda. The final item, we do have need for an executive session, but I'd like to do one item before we do that, which is the presentation on the December blizzard. In a moment, Charlie Monheim will walk us through the presentation. I know that in the month or so since the blizzard occurred, a lot has been said on this topic. And I just wanted to share with you, if I could, a few thoughts before we start this discussion. Extreme events like the holiday blizzard that we have do reveal cracks and weaknesses in an organization. There's no question that some of that came up. No one is questioning it in any way. I think the important thing for us today, the important thing that we've been focused on as an organization going forward from the blizzard, is that we take the opportunity to address these issues and make our organization stronger. As you know, we've already put in place a series of actions that address some of the deficiencies and ensure better performance in future storms. These improvements span the entire process of storm management, from tracking and mobilization to execution and recovery. And in many ways, unfortunately, we've already had several opportunities to test these new procedures, including this morning as we were back on the phone again. The last piece of the puzzle is an in-depth review that I've asked Charlie Monheim, our Chief Operating Officer, to lead. That will look at best practices across peer agencies. It will look to identify areas where we can upgrade equipment, upgrade our procedures, or upgrade our technology on a going forward basis. It's not something that you do as quickly as the other things that get done. It will take a little bit of time. I do, before I turn this over to Charlie, I guess I want to really close with one other point. I don't think, notwithstanding the performance during the blizzard, I don't think that we should overlook the fact that thousands of people at all levels of our organization worked extremely, extremely hard to be able to provide service during the storm and to get us back up and running when that was over. Mistakes were made. I don't question that, but it was not for a lack of trying. And it's in that spirit that we have conducted our review. We are very lucky to have experienced and talented people in our management ranks, in our control centers, and out on the front lines of our organization. And I think it's our responsibility to take this opportunity not to cast blame. I don't think that helps us. I think that what we really should be doing now, and I know the board will join me in this spirit, is to identify opportunities to be able to improve and to identify opportunities to be able to strengthen our organization. That should be our goal as we go forward. Charlie, I'll let you go through the presentation, and then we should have a full discussion of what's here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay, although I'm not completely sure why. But okay. The MTA region experienced a major storm on December 26th and 27th that caused significant transportation service disruptions across the entire region. In saying this, I'm including not only MTA services, but also those of other rail and bus systems, as well as airports. On Monday, December 27th, about one-third of subway stations lost service for at least some period of time. There was limited commuter rail service offered, and bus service was curtailed severely. Service began being restored on Tuesday and was mostly operating normally on Wednesday, although full bus and subway service was not restored until the Thursday. Before discussing the storm response at each agency, I'd like to make some general observations. First, weather forecasting may have become an increasingly sophisticated science, but it is not an exact science. The December storm involved a particularly volatile forecast. Second, while the December storm was very severe and extended across the entire region, not all storms do affect the entire region. During the more recent storms, in January, for example, parts of Metro North Territory have received very significant quantities of new snow, while the city and Long Island have received much less. Therefore, the same level of response will not necessarily apply to all operating agencies. Third, no amount of preparation will necessarily prevent curtailment or suspensions of services. In fact, it may be prudent to curtail or suspend service in order to facilitate the process of reestablishing normal service after a storm. Fourth and finally, snowstorm management consists of 4 phases of activity: storm tracking and readiness, mobilization of staff and equipment, execution of the storm fighting plans during the storm itself, and recovery from the storm by restoring normal service. At each stage, it is critical to maintain effective communication within our agencies, among our agencies, and with external bodies such as OEMs and the news media. It is also of the utmost importance to keep the public apprised of the expected and actual impacts on our services. Now I'd like to provide an assessment of each agency's response to the December storm. Metro North mobilized its resources well. Its service problems on Monday morning were in the Bronx, Manhattan, and Westchester. In the case of the Bronx and Manhattan, trains that had traveled unimpeded from the far reaches of the system were unexpectedly encountered third rail icing conditions. In the case of Westchester, the problems occurred when the pantographs had to be lowered or raised. Metro North recovered quickly and on Tuesday operated an expanded Saturday schedule. Operating less than full weekday service was the appropriate operating decision, but did leave some customers waiting on platforms due to severely overcrowded trains. The New Haven Line car fleet, Metro North's oldest, continues to experience significant reliability and availability effects from the December and subsequent storms. Long Island Railroad suspended service on Sunday night. The suspension was announced in advance and was consistent with the storm protocol that the railroad adopted in early 2010. This imposed significant inconvenience on customers who couldn't get home once the suspension took effect and illustrates the tension between continuing to operate service and risking disabled trains that cause more significant customer inconvenience and hinder efforts to restore normal service. As it was, significant and multiple switch problems in Jamaica on Monday permitted only limited service to be operated on Tuesday. The train times for this limited service were not clearly communicated, and on-platform information was compromised by a communication system crash on Tuesday. Subways did not implement its highest level of readiness, but did take several of the actions that a high level of readiness called for, such as storing trains underground and deploying storm-fighting equipment system-wide. Although over 60% of the system continued to operate more or less normally throughout the storm, slow decisions to curtail service on various lines resulted in a significant number of disabled trains and the stranding of some customers. This impeded the efforts to restore normal service on those lines. Unlike rail services, bus and paratransit services are significantly affected by what is happening in the streets. In the case of this storm, there was a vicious cycle of difficulty clearing snow from streets, resulting in stuck vehicles that added to the difficulty in clearing snow from streets. Some buses operating overnight were blocked by abandoned cars. Others became stuck as the snowfall intensified. Not curtailing or suspending service sooner increased the number of stuck buses and the effort required to retrieve vehicles. Awareness of the situation was not helped by a bus radio system crash. On the positive side, the sanitation department did station a liaison in the bus command center as it had during previous storms. Ineffective coordination contributed to customers being stranded mid-journey. The ferry terminal on Staten Island is a notable example. Also, not making route-level information available on Monday made it difficult for customers to know which services were operating and to what extent. Bridges and tunnels is also a different animal from rail. Within its sphere of influence, bridges and tunnels represents a good practice example of effective mobilization, execution, and recovery. Staff were fully mobilized, and no service interruptions were experienced. The storm response review process began on Friday, December 31st, the day after all services had been restored. We wanted to take advantage of the freshness of the experience to identify immediate actions that could be taken to improve performance before, during, and after future storms. As it happened, we did not have to wait long to apply the lessons learned. The MTA also resolved, as Jay mentioned, to conduct a more thorough review of our storm performance in order to answer more complicated questions and undertake more time-consuming and resource-intensive improvements. Let me enumerate some of the actions that have already been undertaken. MTA headquarters is disseminating incoming weather notifications across agencies. MTA headquarters is also coordinating regular interagency calls to compare forecasts, storm fighting response, and communication strategies. Situation rooms and incident command centers are resourced and ready at operating and support agencies. Subways has created a blizzard response Plan 5 that includes specific service curtailment and suspension actions in response to high winds and high rates of snow accumulation. Under some circumstances, we will proactively cancel non-essential paratransit trips. A customer advocate role has been established at all agencies. Bus road operations and depot staff now coordinate more closely their efforts to assess service conditions route by route during the storms and their aftermath. There is an updated list of priority bus routes to be operated during curtailed service. Department of Buses has updated guidelines for applying chains and replacing articulated buses with standard length buses to improve service resilience. Internal coordination procedures are in place to provide route-specific bus service information through our website. Long Island Railroad, as was mentioned earlier, is developing a limited service schedule for publication, and Metro-North Railroad has established procedures to quickly add service where possible in response to customer demand during storm recovery periods. These lessons have been applied already on 3 occasions in the first 3 weeks of the year. The minor storm on January 7th was a good proving ground for closer interagency cooperation and the activation of situation rooms in advance of snowfall. The 2 subsequent storms, both moderate over most of the MTA region, but more severe in parts of the MTA service area, were handled smoothly and without vehicles being stuck for any significant periods of time. Full coordination took place with OEMs and New York City agencies. I will be coordinating an in-depth review that will identify additional actions that could improve our response to storms. The lessons, the issues to be addressed will include identification of best practices from other systems around the world that contend with snow regularly, review of agencies' internal assessments of the December storm, assessment of equipment and infrastructure vulnerabilities, evaluation of practices and rules that may inhibit storm mobilization or response, identification of equipment and technology that would make MTA agency response to storms more effective, training and simulations that better prepare staff for infrequent events such as the December storm, follow-up by internal audit to review relevant recommendations from previous storm reports, and to confirm implementation of agency-initiated actions. And finally, generalizing from the December snowstorm lessons to other weather-related events. That concludes the presentation, and we'd now be happy to take questions.
Discussion?
I have a question, Mr. Chairman. I guess this is aimed at Tom. Tom, why was the decision made to end service at Whitehall Street when it's underground all the way to 59th Street, Brooklyn, and could have, taken up some slack along 4th Avenue in Brooklyn? And likewise, why was the decision to not run any B service when that's underground from the concourse all the way, could have run to 2nd Avenue or something and taken up some slack on Central Park West?
I don't know the exact answer in terms of why the decision was made in the command and the control center that way. Obviously, when you've got large portions of the system that are underground and not affected by the service, you want to run as much of that service as possible. But the ability to turn trains and the ability to be able to maintain a schedule would be one of the factors that would be considered. But I literally don't know the answer, but we'll take a look at it. The most important thing is that one of the reasons why we've identified a need for another plan, a level plan 5, is that the infrequent nature of these severe storms are such that specialized actions need to be taken, and they're so infrequently taken, you need to think about them ahead of time and identify what those alternatives are. And you don't provide prescriptive means to tell people what to do, but you provide means to say, these are the types of things you consider, and this is what you do. It's contrary to the nature of the system to suspend service or curtail service. So you need to establish that level. And then we would then have scenarios to say, if you want to operate underground as much, these would be the natural terminal points for those routes. And the advantage of doing that, and then having tabletops. I've been in this service, 30 years I've been in it. I've had like 5 blizzards in my career and 3 hurricanes. They're so infrequent, you have to have plans that are specialized, and you have to run tabletop exercises to make sure people understand how to apply the procedures. So they're very good questions that you're asking, and we'll get you an answer as to specifically why the decision was made, because ideally we would have liked to provide more service over a greater section of the system.
Thank you. Jim?
Following up on that response, Tom, on a more general level, I would ask whether we are giving our staff, in the largest sense, all the tools that they need to fight events like this, to get through it. Recognizing that these are sort of one-offs, they can and do provide or cause major disruption to the system, and in many cases, I know, and certainly in the case of Metro North, can disable large parts of the fleet for extended periods of time that go beyond the actual event. It seems to me that the management should take a look at the cost benefit of providing what may be additional equipment and other assets to get us through big events like this, understanding that it's a cost to manage the system effectively in difficult times. Additional snow-moving equipment and other such items, which, while may not be used all the time, is something that we should consider expending for the benefit of the system.
I think you'll see in the scope of work that Charlie laid out for the review, we'll be looking at best practices from other systems. We'll be looking at questions of equipment and technology and ways of being able to do things differently if it were there. I would underscore that in terms of this storm, there was no part of our response that was limited by funding or budget in any way. So that was not the question there. Certainly in the question of buying major pieces of equipment, we should make sure that they're cost beneficial to be able to do that. But in no way was any way of our storm limited by budget in what we were doing here. Alan?
Yes. Well, first of all, I'm pleased that our first response is that we made mistakes, and that is actually a very human reaction. People do make mistakes. Agencies of government, businesses make mistakes, and I'm also happy that we're not engaged in a pointing finger at any particular person or other governmental agencies that also made mistakes in the process, and that the approach is to make sure that we don't make mistakes again. I think that the analysis that Charlie has laid out for us is a fairly comprehensive as to what occurred, and and steps to ensure that these things don't occur again. I think perhaps aside from the operational mistakes, which I have no doubt that we're competent enough and capable enough to correct and make sure they don't occur again. I was probably most distressed by the failure of communication that exists with our customers during the event. And as Bill Henderson mentioned in his couple of minutes before our board meeting, we absolutely need to do better with the public, not only through the media, as there is continual coverage and letting people know what's going on, and not only through online and high tech, but we also need to do better low tech and have people who are actually stationed at points where people are showing up not knowing what to do. I think if we had people at the Staten Island Ferry, for example, letting people knowing what was going on the other side, they would have at least had a half an hour or 45 minutes to be able to deal with it, as opposed to running into it cold. So let's also look at low-tech solutions as well as our high-tech as we go forward. But I think that this review is a good step, and I know that it's in good hands. Thank you, Jay.
Susan?
I, too, am concerned by the communication issue. I see in your scope of work that you are going to be focusing on that, and the agencies that had a problem with communications, I think, should spend a good deal amount of time trying to define how reliability can be improved. We can't stop the snow, but we can improve our way of dealing with our customers on those issues that we have. And that brings me to ask a little clarification on the customer advocate role. I see lots of ways that a customer advocate could play a very beneficial role to us, but are you perceiving that to be active during a storm situation?
Yes, very much.
So that the advocate would actually function to bring information in?
Yeah, the
concept?
advocate is literally stationed in each situation room. Is there during storm situations, and is in part a recognition of the fact that many things are going on, and most of our people are focused on the movement of equipment. That we need somebody who is truly focused 100% of his or her time on the customer implications of what's happening, whether that is communications, whether that is stuck or stranded trains that might be there. And I think it's a best practice example, and again, this is one of the ways that we approach this. It's a best practice example that actually had been started by the Long Island Railroad, and we've now brought into each of our organizations. In the ideal world, that person will have very little to do.
Hopefully.
But we're not banking on that, and I think
good.
that's the difference that would be there.
I'm glad to hear it. Thank
right.
you.
Mark?
I guess my impression was that the Long Island Railroad, that I was immediately familiar with at that moment, suspended service for an extended period of time in this storm. I mean, your presentation talks about comfort trains. I can't imagine what that might be, but as I recall, the announcement on the web about service was that there was none for an extended period of time. I guess that, one, I think it would be interesting to know the sort of cost benefit of more investment in whatever technology would enable us to run trains in storm conditions. It was sort of odd that, in fact, the roads were in much better shape than the railroad on Long Island. And that's one concern I would have. A second one is, I guess there were qualities about that storm. It snowed a lot, it was cold, and it was blowing very hard. And it would be helpful if we were able to communicate with the public that the kind of service failure that happened in that storm was because of, among other things, particular qualities of that storm. And when you get the weather report that it's going to snow 8 inches tomorrow, that there'd be some way of judging the quality of what was supposed to happen tomorrow in terms of what the service consequences were likely to be, that it's not a totally sort of random, out of control issue of how badly things are going to get screwed up. There's sort of levels of likelihood of service disruption, and if we could get a grip on that and communicate it to the public, people might feel less totally sort of randomly at the mercy of circumstances with no way of predicting how it's going to go or when the service is going to come back and things of that kind.
By the way, just because we actually had some practice on this literally this morning, and what we've been trying to do, and I could not agree more. I mean, the management team met this morning to compare all of the weather forecasts. This is a good example of a storm that's highly unpredictable right now. I mean, if you've watched the forecast over the last couple of days, they've shifted all over the places. There are multiple fronts coming. But part of what we did seek to do is to be able to provide a clarity about the evening rush hour, to allow people to understand the services that we'd be able to provide. In fact, we do believe we'll be able to provide a normal service in the evening rush hour, and I think it goes exactly to the point that you're making. Now, as with many things we're talking about here, I'm afraid it's probably not perfect. The storm could shift again, but we did meet, literally first thing this morning to just ensure that we had a collective view of that we were able to do that. And that is aligning our communication messages. So on that call are every one of the agency presidents, myself, and our communications people to be able to align those messages straight out of that. Your point is extremely well taken about the extent to which we can provide that information in advance helps people to be able to make their choices about doing that. Nancy, I'm sorry.
I'm sort of responding to Alan's general comments about how it is comforting that the MTA management is being forthright in admitting that mistakes were made and that there were, not going forward, severe communication issues. But I don't want to sound like the MTA management cheerleader, but as Mark just said, let's not gloss over the fact that there were unusual aspects to the storm. It was a holiday week for many, I don't want to say for most, for many people. It was an act of God to get this level and unusual storm at that particular week. And I have to say that there were, from what I hear, and not through complaints by the MTA staff, workers throughout from all the ranks of the MTA, but there were tremendous hours put in during that week when many of us were home with our families. And I just would like to thank the people that did put enormous hours in that week. And I would also not want to speak without mentioning just one more time that some of the agencies did act or react in a positive manner. It wasn't it was a horrible situation, but it wasn't a complete debacle, disaster. And let's just try to carve out some of the positive reactions to the MTA, please.
Pat?
Jay, thanks. 3 points. One is I want to applaud the real-time continuous improvement approach here in Charlie's report, which I found comprehensive. I especially want to applaud the point on page 12 in which there's a time set for the in-depth review to be completed. And I think that having that accountability is extraordinarily important. Second point, however, is I would respectfully suggest that we look at the systems, the MTA, the organization's response to the February 2006 storm, which the Times called the worst storm ever, 26.9 inches. New York Times said it exceeded all forecast change, gusts of up to 60 miles per hour. And the Times noted, and Times is never wrong, that Long Island Railroad and Metro North continued to run. On the railroad, Long Island Railroad, which was of particular interest to me and Mitch, I guess service on the Hempstead and Port Washington branches was stopped, and service in and out of Penn Station was stopped. But even during the height of the storm, according to the Times, Long Island Railroad and Metro North service continued. So I think taking a look at the 2006, and I fully appreciate that all storms are different. I want to echo Nancy's comment to applaud both our union workers and management workers for their response during this, because as we were, many of us home enjoying the holidays, there were men and women of the MTA and its agencies who were working hard. Thirdly, I want to make the following point, which is I think that the Long Island Railroad's limited service schedules that Helena is thinking about advocating, I think maybe a two-edged sword for a couple of reasons. And I want to start with the point that our first priority is customer and employee safety, and that's clear. But I think that by publishing or having available limited service schedules that we may fall into a situation in which we're too eager to hit the trigger of moving to limited service. And I'll just make the point that this is not Atlanta or Boston or Philadelphia or Pittsburgh or Green Bay. This is New York. And people expect to get to work even if they have to schlep and slog through it. And I think that going to limited service, frankly, ought to be a last resort, subject in each case to customer and employee safety. The last thing, slightly off point, but I'll mention it anyway, I would hope that the concerns of the woman from the Track Worker Fund, which I know little about, have been considered by staff, or if not, will be considered going forward. Thanks.
Mitch? Two issues that I wanted to raise in relation to the railroad, which I thought, did a pretty good job, but there are two issues that most customers need, and I would ask Charlie to emphasize these two in his report. Number one is the issue of Jamaica and the inadequacy of the switching system to be able to perform at optimum level based upon weather conditions. What that does is it provides a false sense of security for people in other places on the island who see that their track is clear, so how come I can't get to Penn Station? And the ability of people to get through Jamaica, unfortunately whoever built the system did it that way back when, has a major impact on the ability of the railroad to provide service to and from the city, even in times when other parts of the island may be either not necessarily clear, but not as significantly hampered by the storm. So I would urge, Charlie, if you could, to make that a focal point, at least from the railroad's perspective, because it does, somebody who's out in Ronkonkoma and has no snow wants to know why the train can't get to Penn Station. There may be a good reason, but they're not seeing it where they happen to be at that point in time. The other issue, and Helena and I have talked about this tremendously, and I would urge you to do it, is the issue of platform communication on the railroad. Obviously, the ability to station a person at selected stations is appropriate, whether it's Penn or others, but the ability to station a person at every railroad station, whether it's Long Island or Metro North, is impossible to do, which forces the people who are there, whether they're supposed to be there or not, they are there, to rely on the boards which are there. And the inability of the railroad to be able to significantly change the boards at a real-time basis to provide up-to-date information is a very significant handicap. Because, and I know the railroad tried to do it, in fact was ready to do it, and then the system crashed again, and that is very unfortunate because that's the only means of communication, real-time communication, that the people who are there have when they get to the station. And our ability to rectify that problem, whether it means investing in a new system or investing in modifications to that system, is essential to make that happen in that regard. So I would urge, at least from the railroad's perspective, those two issues to be a focal point of your review.
Thank you. Ira?
I just want to support what Patrick said and Alan and certainly Mark Page, but I do have additional points about interagency cooperation. One of the issues we faced on Long Island, at least the Commuters Council did, is parking lots, which are not under the control of the railroad for the most part. The railroad attempted to put up a chart, I know, which most of the commuters did not, at least people in my Commuters Council didn't see, that said these these lots are plowed. Now, someone else said it was incomplete. I said, well, that's what they know. So I think if it could be better, and I know at we had also participated with the PCAC office in trying to contact some of the local town officials or whoever was responsible plowing to plow the stations because they're not the top priority. We've had parking lots unplowed for a week, so that creates a problem for the commuter. If they could be better, maybe we could put a little pressure on the railroad. I don't know. As far as equipment goes, I think we need a standard of what is acceptable in any snowstorm. I think, in conversation with people at the Community Council, I asked this question. You can miss one day of work, but another day, that's hard to do. That's hard for people to miss 2 days successful work, and that's actually what happened because of the crowding on the Long Island Railroad and Metro North, and even on the transit system, we still were not running service after that Monday. And I think looking at that, I don't know if we want to establish that as a standard, but I think maybe we should look for that as a goal. That even in a severe storm, we should be able to have full service back the next day. And I think what Patrick said is very important, that we should really look to running full service. Limited service is a last resort. And within a 24-hour period after the snow starts, we should be able to have service back. And the question is, what do we need to do that? And if we need equipment that we may only use 10 or 15 years at a time, we should do a cost-benefit analysis. But that should also include not costs just to the railroad or to the MTA, but costs to the region. Because when people can't get to work, that's a severe impact on employers, et cetera. And our responsibility is to make sure they get to work. And I think that's what we have to look at. And that would be what I would suggest as a standard. I want to compliment the railroad in this situation. In terms of lessons learned we have here, the railroad learned lessons from last year in December. And the reason why, Mark mentioned what these trains were, there were trains parked at Jamaica, Helena can tell you more about that, to make sure that people who were at Jamaica weren't stuck in the cold, that there was a place for them to go that was warm, there were bathrooms, they switched the trains out. We don't want to see a situation where a train is stranded mid-route in the middle of nowhere with no power, because that's what will happen. And I compliment the railroad for addressing that problem. And also for our last Long Island Communities Council, we had a very open and good discussion with some staff at the railroad, and we had a very good education for us, and for us to think about what needs to be done in the future. And as far as communication with the railroad, Helena's office has been very good about working with the Communities Council. I must compliment her on it and in responding to our emails even during the storm of problems. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments, questions, Jim?
I can tell you that in my 17 years here, I've never seen a month like this, which tells us that this is very unusual situation. But I have to look around, and I can tell you that the work that's been done by this organization, in light of the facts of what we've got consistently, week after week after week, has been phenomenal. I know that I've been in contact with the president of Metro North, Howard, on an occasional basis to keep me up to date. And I can tell you, I can't remember where there's been so much cooperation. And I think for the first time I sense that that's an all-agency cooperation, because we can all help each other. All our agencies stand and have our particular problems, but we can help each other because we have certain ways we can do things that will help all of us. You talk about parking lots. Well, we control our parking lots, a lot of them in Metro North. Now we have a problem of where we're going to put the snow, because there's no room for it. So that's something we have to look at going forward. I mean, what do we need to melt this snow? And what do we do with the water once we melt it? So there's a lot of questions that get borne up by having these kind of experiences. Now, hopefully you don't have another experience like this over 17 years from now. But it's something we can learn from and put together a plan, so that this Plan 5 that Tom's talking about, I think, is a great idea. So we've got something to go to on some kind of a regular basis, just to practice, to make sure we know what's going to happen if something happens. But again, there's nothing I can say that all of our people have done a great job, and I'm proud to be associated with people that have worked as hard as they do. We've got people that are afraid of this next storm because of whether they're going to be, they're really worn out, they're tired. So
I'm afraid to look behind the curtain right now to see whether it's still snowing. So I'm glad that they're down. Other questions, comments, Doreen?
Tom, Carmen, and Daryl are A-plus performance guys. And this was a storm in which I think an A-plus performance was well nigh impossible. If we could use our imaginations for a second to think about operating a subway car on elevated track in whiteout conditions with snow accumulating at the rate of 3 inches an hour, you know what these guys are grappling with. We've spoken about, and you did, given the circumstances, you did the very best you could do. And I know that all of us were distressed, deeply distressed by the stranded passenger situation. And I think the customer advocate role that we've talked about is hopefully meant to prevent that type of situation. I know you described it to me in some detail, Tom, how that would work. And it's hoped that that would prevent another situation where a train is in a station where there aren't adequate services for people to get out, use bathrooms, stay in a heated environment. We have to look forward, and I think this is a plan that will enable us to hopefully tackle the many storms that we're likely to encounter over the course of this winter, hopefully none as severe as what we've had. But you put this together in very, very rapid time, and I think it was a great job.
Anyone else before we can? Yes.
Tom, did the lack of automatic train supervision on the B division hinder you in any way as to knowing where each and every train was? Is that something we want to try to...
It would certainly help if we had it, but railroads run for 100 years without automatic train supervision. What happens in the mentality of the people who are running the system, and this isn't a negative, it's a statement of fact. People that are managing a line are trying to manage a line, and as the chairman said, concerned about movement of trains. What happens in a storm, and you get a train in what you think is a safe location, and at this location, in their mind it was a station, but it's a seasonal station. It doesn't have all the facilities. So there was a disconnect in their mind saying, okay, that train's parked, it's okay, let's worry about other parts of the system, which underscores the need for an advocacy person, because somebody needs to be handed that responsibility that says, okay, starting at 12:08 now, we've got customers sitting on a train, and then as time goes by, they're saying, wait a minute, what's the strategy to take care of those customers? Who's going out to rescue them? And that's the responsibility they have. They don't have any other responsibilities other than managing that customer concern. Because if you put too much responsibility on a person, something won't get done. So that's what needs to happen. And there's no explaining an excuse. There's no acceptable explanation for somebody on a train 6 or 7 hours. There's just none.
Alan, did you want to say something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, just changing this topic before we go into executive session. I saw a report, as I'm sure many of us did, on television last night about a Metro North car that was open in a video. And, I mean, my comment here is not about the fact that happened, because doors open and close hundreds of millions of times a year, and you'll have breakdown, and I understand that there will be an investigation as to why this particular incident happened. But what particularly distressed me was to learn when I inquired this morning was that nobody on the train reported it to a person who works for the train. And that to me is just an astounding thing. Doors open are dangerous. The video showed people riding next to the open door, which is reckless. And I have no problem with somebody taking a video and posting it online, and I believe in free press and free communication. But there is also a responsibility for people to make sure that those around them are safe. And that I would hope that should something like that occur in the future, people would get away from the door, and they would let personnel on the train know that it happens, and not be quite so anxious for their several moments of fame.
Okay. Obviously, safety is a very high priority for our organization. We are concerned about the situation that we saw. The train has been taken out of service, and investigation is underway. It's hard to say much more than that at the moment. And I think Metro North, to the point you're making, has also instituted a procedure this morning to be able to make announcements across the train in regard to doors and also in regard to notifying staff. But we will be back with when we have more information. It's a little hard to give more information to that right now. Let me conclude this discussion by thanking you for what I think is the constructive tenor of the discussion that has taken place today. You have offered a focus, comments, suggestions that I think is helpful. We will very much take it into regard in the way that we conduct the further review. We will continue to discuss this with the board as we go forward, and I think Charlie has put a realistic timeline on coming back and being able to discuss this. We are hopeful of getting a few moments in between storms to breathe. That has not yet been the case in doing it. But again, I would underscore, I think, what many of you said. I can't tell you how much we have relied on the thousands of men and women across our organization to deal with these difficult storms. And frankly, even the ones that we consider in some way, in quotes, to be easy, are never easy. They involve an enormous amount of preparation. They involve an enormous amount of moving equipment. They involve an enormous amount of having a railroad recover from situations or a bus system recover from situations that are there. And I can't underscore the impact that this has on all of our equipment. I had a conversation with Jimmy Farrar, who I think he said to me, he said, Jay, you have to understand that the minute that we feel we have things under control, we move into the process of maintaining our equipment because we don't know when the next storm is there, and each of these storms beats the heck out of our equipment that's there. We haven't even had that opportunity in some parts of our railroad right now, in particular Metro North, to be able to do this. This is tremendously difficult for what we are dealing with. I think people have worked very, very hard over a long period to deal with this, and we're far. I don't think we've crossed into February yet, if my sense of the calendar is right. So we've got a ways to go. If I can have a motion, please, for executive session. Okay. Thank you.
Jay, you talked about adding a Plan 5 on. What would that entail? What's the idea there?
Well, I think as you've seen, we moved to the highest level of readiness that we have on the subway system when we get conditions of about 6 inches or so. That plan involves, for example, moving trains underground for storage and being able to do things of that nature, moving equipment to be in place. I think that the Plan 5 point was really to say that occasionally we have storms that are much more extreme than that that are going to involve in some way the suspension of some services. Again, and really what I think that Tom Prendergast and Carmen Bianco have been talking about is creating that plan so that we have really a model to be able to work from when we're in those situations. I have to stress that the difficulty with saying that is that when you get to these extreme storms, every storm is unique. And so it is incumbent upon us, and we need to be able to execute given the conditions that are happening out there. And so I don't think there's going to be a playbook that you can take off the shelf and say to be able to do it. But I think that both Tom and Carmen believe that if we create this plan and practice against it through a tabletop exercise, as we do for other things within the system, that would be preferable for us.
So the idea is planning for the suspension of service.
It's planning for extreme storms in which suspension of service or suspension of some services may be required.
Is there like a number of inches that would have to fall?
I don't think it's a set number of inches. I think it depends a lot on the types of conditions that we are having out there. I think you'll find circumstances in which we've been able to run very, very successfully through very large numbers of inches of snow, and you'll find other conditions that may have to do in different ways. I think we need to rely on the management of the organization to be able to assess the impacts that are happening in regard to particular storms, in regard to particular areas. The situation we had with the blizzard was very much compounded by the high winds that were there. So not just the number of inches, but the high winds ended up blowing snowdrifts in places. And again, I just think storms are storms. They all vary. And I think we do have to practice, we do have to be in place to be able to do that, but we do have to recognize that we have to deal with the existing conditions that each storm puts in front of us.
So would this plan include something like preemptively stopping service on the open cut lines in southern Brooklyn?
It would include, certainly the question of stopping service is of a greater question for lines that are in the outdoors than lines that are underground. I think what it would be looking at is the questions as to which places we think are most vulnerable in that regard, how we would develop plans if we do have to suspend services to best be able to effectuate that suspension, how we'd best be able to effectuate the communication of those, and importantly within that, how can we do it in a way that facilitates the recovery so that we're able to minimize the amount of time that service is out. In general, and again this is a broad generalization, in general we would like to keep the trains moving because it facilitates two things. One, it is obviously of the best interest to our customers if we can do it safely. And second, keeping trains moving is actually the best way to keep the tracks clear.
Jay, this was admittedly a desperately bad blizzard, but it wasn't the first one the MTA's faced. And you talk about not wanting to play a blame game here, but what do you say to folks that it seems to be a lack of accountability, perhaps within the agency, on this storm in particular?
I don't think there's any lack of accountability. We sat here today. We said that mistakes were made. We're not shying away from that. But literally from the day after we restored service, my goal and the goal of every one of our agency presidents has been to be able to learn from the situations that we've had, to be able to put new procedures and new practices in place, and we have done that literally from New Year's Eve, which is the day after the fact that we had all of the services back in place. The men and women across this organization, our management and our represented employees, have worked extremely hard. They work like hell to be able to deal with these storms. Through long hours, through hard work, I don't think there's any question about effort that has gone into what we've done.
So in your mind, does these snowstorms add any urgency to some larger capital infrastructure investments, things like on Long Island Railroad, a third track or a double track that would allow the LIR to more easily, keep service while cleaning up the rails at the same time?
Well, I think there's no question if you ask any of our agencies that everyone loves to have flexibility in the way that we operate our trains and more capacity to be able to do so. I think our focus, though, however, is really much more on equipment that might have been helpful for us to be able to do that. I think there are questions at each of our agencies about whether or not there are things that we could buy or other ways that we could change things to be able to do things. I think Long Island Railroad will benefit tremendously when we have east side access because it takes away their access into Manhattan is through one point. I think as part of that process we're also rebuilding Jamaica, which I think will improve the reliability as well. But I don't think there are going to be any easy answers in terms of large capital projects to be able to do that.
Council members had asked some specific questions about why wasn't the Emergency Operations Center open? Why didn't MTA move up to the highest level of emergency until 19 hours after the blizzard warning had been issued? Do you have those specific answers?
I think the answer to that is that we didn't move. We said that we didn't move as quickly as we should have to be able to do that. We've instituted new procedures to ensure that in any future storms we're better able to move to those circumstances. We've been testing those procedures, unfortunately, with lots of practice as each of the storms have come into place, including this morning as we've met as well. And I'm confident that we're in a place to be able to deal with the situations that had come up.
Even the mayor was saying on Sunday night, take public transportation, that Sunday of the storm, and it seemed that there was a disaster looming for Monday. Can you explain that disconnect?
I think it's very clear that the severity of this storm, the changing patterns that came with that December blizzard and the severity of that storm was something that was creating difficulty all across in terms of the storm tracking and storm watching. I would point out that storm tracking and watching is not a science. We get multiple weather forecasts. The weather forecasts will differ in different parts of the region. They will differ sometimes in the same area. It's not surprising for any of us who sit at home and turn on different weather forecasts at home to hear different forecasts that are happening. And if you listen to a forecast at one point in time and you come back and listen to a forecast a little bit later, they sometimes change. We're seeing that today. We're seeing that today. The forecast has changed since this morning when I met with my team at 8 o'clock, just as I was updated right before I came here. The forecast has gotten worse over the last 3 hours. So I think one of the things that this underscores is the need to be able to deal with a degree of alacrity to the changes that are taking place. I believe we have put in place procedures to be able to do that. I think we're executing on those procedures right now, and I think it has shown up in the way that we've been able to handle the storms that have come subsequent to the December blizzard.
There might be this. There's something to be said for the idea that it wasn't at one moment 1 hour the storm is going to be 6 inches, the next hour is going to be 15 inches. It wasn't varying that much, and so. The argument could be made that, you knew a severe storm of some capacity was coming. You just didn't know if it was going to be a blizzard or not. And that kind of goes back to why certain plans were called and not called.
I think clearly we would have moved more quickly in hindsight. Again, as the other point that I made before, and I would underscore, it is not just the number of inches. I think a lot of the impact that came from the storm also came from the high winds that were there, from the drifting snows that were there. I don't think you can look at this as just one part of what was going on. Yes, in hindsight, we would have called it more quickly. I would tell you right now, as we look at the storm that's going on outside, each of our agencies has moved to the highest level of their readiness. We now have instituted a procedure in which we are speaking as a team, and if any agency is not moving to the same level of readiness, we at least have a discussion about whether or not it would be appropriate to change the readiness. So again, mistakes were made, no question about that. The important point I think right now is you've had a clear, candid discussion of what we can do, of the steps that we're putting in place to be able to do it. We're acting and executing on those steps, and I think that's what's most important.
Do you think that some of the huge costs that you accrued, some of them could have been avoided had a certain level of preparation been enacted sooner?
This was a heck of a storm. We were going to have huge costs under any circumstances. You've heard me talking about overtime, almost from the day that I've walked in the door, and you've heard me give an example every single time of what I consider to be good or important overtime, which is dealing with snow. It is a situation which we have to do. Is it possible that we incurred some additional costs? Perhaps. I don't know that we'll ever be able to slice it up in that way. But I think it is clear that it is strongly in the public interest for the MTA to deal aggressively, actively, proactively with any storms that are coming up, to be able to keep people moving within our region. We will do that. That will involve the incurrence of overtime, and when we have bad storms, that will be expensive.
Governor Cuomo had some very positive things to say this week about your performance here. Provided a very warm vote of confidence, so I just want to congratulate you on that.
Thank you.
And also ask, now moving forward, just what your outlook is for your working relationship with the governor and the new administration. Do you believe that he'll be an ally in approaching some of the funding challenges that are coming up this year for the Transportation Authority?
I think that we've been working very, very well together, and thank you very much. I think there is a real recognition on the part of the new administration of the steps that the MTA has taken over the last year, and I think that was reflected in some of the statements that were put out by the governor's office, both in terms of overhauling the MTA and dealing with the cost structure of this organization, but also the service improvements that we've put into place across the organization, which I think are being recognized by our passengers, by our customers. I think the governor has also talked quite a bit about the importance of infrastructure and the importance of transportation. Yes, we know we have some challenges in front of us, no question about that. But I think the underlying foundation, which says that the transportation infrastructure is essential to the metropolitan region, and the importance of infrastructure, not just now, but over the long history of New York State, of the success of the state of New York, is something that he's talked about, and I think that is a important foundation for what we have to do going forward.
Congestion pricing is back on the table. Do you have any thoughts on what can make that successful this time around?
Well, I only know what I read in the paper, frankly, so I haven't had any discussions about congestion pricing. But I think that if it means that people are thinking creatively about the ways to be able to deal with our capital program, about some of our long-term issues, and that's terrific. We'll have to wait to see how those discussions play out.
This will be the year where the Capital Program Review Board, obviously, there are 3 years of funding that you guys are trying to get nailed down. I just wonder, is there a particular way you're approaching that? That seems like one of the more important collaborations with Albany that you need to get done this year.
Right. Well, I think, first off, I'd say I think the Capital Program Review Board took a very important step last year. Because they put in place a fully funded capital program for 2010 and 2011. That's the basis under which we're working right now. And in doing that, I think everyone recognized that we needed to come back and deal with the last 3 years of our capital program. They approved the program, but they did not approve the full funding that went alongside that program. We'll be engaging with the review board both in regard to the importance of the investments that are in our program, the ways in which we are working, and we continue to work to be able to reduce the cost of projects if we can do that. And you'll recall that in our capital program last year, we were able to find efficiencies that total about $2 billion in the pieces that are there, and any creative measures that we can find to be able to work toward filling that. And that'll be an ongoing discussion.
Time for one more, John. New Jersey Governor Christie says that his people are talking to Bloomberg's people about a 7-train extension. Is MTA consulted at all about this? Do you have an opinion about that?
The MTA has been in some discussions with the administration about the number 7 proposal. It is at the very preliminary, various early stages of discussions that have been taking place. As a general matter, I would continue to say that I find it very exciting that people want to look at transportation improvements within our region. I would underscore, of course, that we need to do in the context of meeting both our existing needs and being able to do other parts. But I think if you step back from that for a second, I think the broadest message here is that this is a region that depends on its transportation infrastructure. There is a need for the transportation infrastructure to continue to grow and evolve for the needs of a changing city. And I think the fact that elected officials all across the region and all across the state are cognizant of that is critically important for the MTA and terrific.